This video is going to be a comprehensive guide on the reasons why somebody might walk or squat with an excessively foot turned out position. Now understand that the fact that somebody has a duck foot presentation doesn't necessarily tell us where the limitations are. We have to dive deeper and find out why the body is adopting this kind of strategy to propel yourself forward in space or to sink lower in a squat. And this could be based on a few different restrictions we're going to cover in this video. Understand walking with your feet turned out or squatting with a bit of foot turn out isn't necessarily bad. It's not something we necessarily need to fix. Most likely, if you have this sort of posture, you've had it for a long time and your body's adapted. But if you're unable to go the opposite way based on the restrictions we talk about, then it can lead to some overuse injuries, either at the knee, the hip, or even the ankle. Now, throughout my teens and in college when I was playing sports, I really struggled with this, and it affected my running mechanics and my ability to squat deep. I couldn't squat to parallel, even without significant foot turnout to parallel. And then from there, my hips were blocked and I couldn't even get below that without really rounding my back. And now I can squat with my feet relatively pointed forward. So what I thought was a structural limitation and just simply how my bones were shaped wasn't really. Now, I do tend to still adopt kind of a foot turned out posture, but it's gotten significantly better. So if this is something you struggle with and it's something you want to fix based on aesthetics, or you notice some overuse injuries in the foot, knee, and the hip, then you can certainly make progress, and we're going to dive right into it now. We're going to go over 5 different reasons why somebody might walk or squat with their feet turned out, and then we're going to cover some of my go-to exercises for each of those reasons. Now stick around to the end because I'm going to have a full program laid out for you that you can follow throughout your week to work on these restrictions and fix your duck feet. The first restriction, and probably the most impactful, is probably going to be a lack of internal rotation at the hip. You can test this on your back with your hip flexed to 90 degrees, rotating your foot out. And you can also do this in standing or kneeling and rotating the pelvis across a fixed femur. And you'll notice one side feels more difficult than the other. When we walk, if the pelvis can't effectively rotate over the femur, then it's going to turn the foot out with it and drag the femur along with the direction of pelvic rotation, as you can see here. One of my favorite drills to work on hip internal rotation is in half kneeling, and this is going to stretch some of the hip external rotators and the joint capsule. So we're going to get in half kneeling, anchor the inside of the foot against a heavy object, then we're going to rotate the torso, which rotates the pelvis over that fixed femur, stretching into internal rotation. So we can go dynamically for reps here. As I rotate maximally, I can drive the inner part of my foot into that box and then push myself out of it. Not just using momentum at the torso, but actually envisioning the pelvis rotating toward and rotating away. We want to make sure that we're not in a posterior pelvic tilt here, because we don't want to be shortening the glutes and hip rotators. Here we feel blocked off and we don't have anywhere to actually rotate because those tissues are shortened. So if we keep a slight anterior pelvic tilt and then rotate, then we're going to get much better lengthening into those hip rotators. Now we can also do this in 90 degrees of hip flexion, which will have a better carryover to our deep squat. So we can do this in quadruped, which will have a better effect of driving the femur posterior in the socket, which will improve that hip flexion. And again, we're rotating that pelvis over a fixed femur. We don't want to just overly rotate at the torso here. So if we're not actually feeling a stretch and just a jamming in the trunk, then we know we're rotating too far and not actually moving that pelvis over the femur through internal rotation. Okay, the next restriction is going to be tibial internal rotation. So this is when the shin moves inward. And you're going to know you're actually rotating through the tibia when you look at this tibial plateau bone and actually feel that moving inward, and it's not just the foot inverting. You also want to get comfortable with feeling your inner hamstring contraction. So if I rotate my toe inward, I should feel these inner hamstrings kick on, because the inner hamstrings are the muscles that are going to perform tibial internal rotation. Now, restrictions in tibial internal rotation are typically going to be more noticeable in a bent knee position. So if you really struggle with squatting, with keeping the feet forward, odds are you have a restriction in tibial internal rotation, and you're very biased toward tibial external rotation. Now, even if you have a hip internal rotation restriction, and that forces you to squat with your knees turned out to find more internal rotation at the hip, you're basically starting with more femoral external rotation, so your pelvis has space to internally rotate into. If you don't have the tibial internal rotation to then keep the feet facing forward in this wide stance, then the feet are just going to be dragged into external rotation along with the femur. So you can still have external rotation at the hip and still keep the feet facing forward. And this would demonstrate that you have decent tibial internal rotation. And this is something that was very restricted for me. I probably had zero internal rotation at the tibia. So freeing this up was a great way to also help with my ankle mobility and my hip mobility. Okay, and here's one of my favorite ways to work on tibial internal rotation. I'm going to take a band. It's going to be anchored behind my foot, so it has a nice line of pull to pull me into some passive tibial internal rotation. Now it's pulling the foot into inversion as well, but it's going to drag the tibia into internal rotation along with it. Now I'm seated, so my knee is bent around 90 degrees. This is going to be where we have more room and space in the joint to rotate internally. And I have a foam roller positioned under my inner heel, or behind my inner heel, and between this box I'm sitting on. And this is going to give us reference to drive the heel into and create some medial hamstring contraction. So we're going to alternate contractions here. I'm going to pre-position the tibia in as much internal rotation by spinning my shin in. You don't necessarily need to do this because the band is doing it for you, but I like to just have a little bit more of that overpressure. Now we're going to contract the foot out into external rotation. Okay, you should feel your outer hamstrings controlling that. And the band should be pulling tight enough that it's isometric, you're not really moving it. So I'm going to actually step on this band so it's a little bit more tense. Okay, so I'm contracting. I feel my outer hamstrings. I'm going to relax, allow the band to pull me into more internal rotation, and then I'm going to simultaneously drive my heel into the roller. Now I really feel my inner hamstrings turning on. So I'm going to hold that, crush the foam roller, 10 seconds, then relax. Reverse the contraction, externally rotate the tibia, feel those lateral hamstrings, and relax, and then crush the heel into the roller. And we're going to repeat that 3 to 5 cycles, 10-second contractions each. Okay, so after you're done, retest your ability to squat deep. See if you could keep that foot facing a bit more forward. Typically, we want around 10 to 20 degrees of tibial internal rotation. A lot of people who have duck feet have 0 or even negative internal rotation, so just getting a little bit more will go a long way. Okay, the next 2 restrictions I commonly see that are local to the foot are going to be a lack of big toe extension and a lack of ankle dorsiflexion at the talocrural joint. So when we're walking, if we don't have the ability to extend the big toe when the foot comes behind the hip into hip extension, then we're going to try to find an alternate strategy by turning the whole leg out to swing forward. Okay, we need adequate big toe extension to keep this femur in the sagittal plane in this straight alignment, or else we're going to swing the leg out. Now, when we're stepping forward and our shin is then traveling over the foot segment, if we don't have the dorsiflexion, then we're just going to turn the foot out naturally as a strategy to find that inner arch and ball of the big toe as we move through mid-stance. Okay, for the exercise intervention, we're actually going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. My favorite way to actually work on ankle dorsiflexion is by working on big toe extension at the same time. What extending the big toe does, you'll see now that my big toe is cranked into extension against the foam roller, is it naturally lifts the arch. A lot of times people bypass ankle dorsiflexion by just collapsing at the ankle and moving the knee inwards. And they don't actually mobilize the talocrural joint, which is responsible for ankle dorsiflexion, and they're just stealing range of motion through the subtalar joint at the heel and the midfoot. So extending the big toe basically locks the midfoot into supination, so we can concentrate that motion at the talocrural joint and focus primarily on dorsiflexion. And we should feel a nice stretch here through the Achilles when we do this properly. So we can do this in a half kneeling position with a weight loaded over top and play around with the knee alignment over the toes. For me, if I have the knee tracking over the big toe, this feels like the best stretch for me. Some people feel a little bit better when the knee is tracking over the pinky toe. Now, how we can spice this up is do it in standing, holding the weight on the same side. And I want to drive the knee as far forward as I can until the heel lifts up. Okay, so here, my knee is driven even more forward, and I'm going to try to maintain that position, crush the toes into the roller as I bring the heel back down to the ground. So lift, drive the knee forward. You'll feel a really big stretch through the big toe. Keep that knee position as you drive the heel down to the ground. You'll feel that big stretch through the Achilles. Okay, so perform this for some of these pulsing style reps, anywhere from sets of 45 to 60 seconds. And this will significantly improve your ankle dorsiflexion without feeling that blockage at the front of the joint. Okay, the last reason isn't necessarily a range of motion based one, but it's actually a capacity issue. So typically weakness in the ankle plantar flexors, that's not just the gastrocnemius and the soleus, but also the lateral calf muscles here, the peroneals. These muscles get significantly weak when you walk with a foot turnout because these muscles on the side control eversion of the ankle. Now, a lot of times when I ask somebody to walk who has duck feet, and I ask them to force themselves into a foot forward position, a lot of times they feel a lot of their weight on the lateral aspect of the foot. And you can even look at their shoes, and where they're worn out is usually on this outside part, and they really struggle to find the inner part of their foot. And these peroneal muscles are really struggling to allow the inner part of the foot to maintain contact with the ground as you walk. And also, if you just simply have weak calves in general, you got twig legs, then this is a good sign. You probably need to work on them. All right, the first drill is going to be a stretch for the calves, but it's also going to be an isometric strengthening exercise for ankle eversion. It's going to strengthen some of those peroneal muscles on the outside. You're going to need a slant board or wedge, a weight. So I'm going to place my back foot on the wedge, heel down, and then I'm going to lift my uplift knee toward my chest, and then I'm going to abduct my hip. You'll see what this does is it drags the pelvis inward, which also drags the tibia inward along with it, and I immediately feel more pressure through the inner part of my foot. And then, now that I feel a good stretch in the calf, I'm just simply going to hover the heel and then lean my weight forward even more and really crush the inner part of my arch and ball of the big toe into the wedge while actively trying to drive my heel down to the ground, but not fully, because I still want to create that isometric. Now, if this feels good, you can hold it for 45 to 60 seconds. I'm going to grab a weight, so I'll show you on the other side. Weight in the same hand, knee up to chest, lean forward, abduct, hover the heel, and really crush the inner part of my foot into the wedge. So I feel not only a nice stretch and load going through the calf, but I also feel those lateral calf muscles really working hard to evert the foot in this lengthened dorsiflexed position. And again, we should feel no pinch in the front of the ankle. This last drill is going to integrate hip internal rotation and adduction with ankle dorsiflexion, making sure we can maintain those inner foot pressures as we perform this calf raise. So you'll notice here, my right side of the pelvis is dropped lower than the left. So I'm shifting into that left hip as I'm performing the calf raise here. A compensation we want to avoid is that foot spinning out into inversion early on, and we lose that inner foot pressure, and we also lose that internal rotation as our pelvis rotates away. So we want to ensure we keep the opposite hip dropped so we feel a stretch in the lateral hip as we perform the calf raise, going into a deep stretch and then pausing and then coming out. And we might not even fully calf raise. If you only get back to neutral, then that's fine, as long as you maintain that inner foot pressure on the box. Here it is from the side. Now, if you really want to incorporate some deep flexibility work in here through the hips, then you can fold as low as you can, as low as your flexibility and your hip internal rotation allows for. Now, what we want to avoid here is rocking forward. We want to think about shifting the hip back as we perform the calf raise, so the line of force is moving directly vertical. Okay, thank you for watching till the end, and as I promised, here is the program all laid out for you. So you're going to perform this protocol 3 days a week, and I don't want you doing all 5 drills each session. That'll take too long. We should only be spending about 15 to 20 minutes on this each session. So day 1, we're going to do 3 sets of hip internal rotation, dynamic reps, 10 to 12 reps with a 20-second hold last rep. Then we're going to do the tibial internal rotation, banded isometrics, around 2 to 3 cycles, 5 to 10-second contractions each, so driving into tibial external rotation, then driving into tibial internal rotation. And then we're going to do the big toe extension and dorsiflexion pulses in standing, holding a weight. This is going to be the more intense day. So day 2 will be more of a light day. We're going to do the tibial IR isos again, and then we're just going to follow that with the kneeling big toe extension. So you'll just place a moderately heavy kettlebell on the top of the knee. Just hold for 45 to 60 seconds. You can do a light isometric, driving the toes into the roller as you drive the knee over the toe. And that's it. Day 3, we're hitting it again with the hip internal rotation. That joint capsule and deep hip rotators should be recovered by now from day 1. Ideally, you have had over 72 hours rest. This might look like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. So then after the hip internal rotation work, we are getting after the calf work. So the wall leaning, straight leg, calf, iso with heel hover and pelvic rotation away. So the rotation of the pelvis kind of facilitates some tibial internal rotation where we can really find that lateral calf contraction. So we find the calf stretch, then hover the heel while crushing the inner part of the forefoot into the wedge. Then we integrate that internal rotation at the hip and forefoot eversion with the single leg donkey calf raise with the hip shift, making sure we drop that opposite side pelvis so the working side is higher than the non-working side. Pausing in the stretch each rep, and remember we don't have to go all the way up. We want to just go as far up as we can maintain that inner foot contact on the wedge or step. Okay, so here's your routine. Do it consistently, 3 months, 6 months, however long it takes. Okay guys, that's the video. If you found it helpful, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. If you want help understanding your main restrictions and you need an individualized assessment, then please reach out and we can discuss online coaching options. But please give these exercises a try and be consistent with them, and I promise you're going to make really good progress. Over the course of months and even years, these postural changes take a long time to fix, and it didn't happen for me overnight. But if you do try these exercises, please let me know in the comments what you think of them. If there's any other issues you're struggling with that you want me to make a video on, let me know in the comments and I'll get right to it. Till then, stay supple.